Hello and welcome to the CivilTalk Podcast. I'm your host, Tapasio Althouse. If you're new to the show, this is where we explore civility and social emotional learning with esteemed guests, expert insights, and practical advice to help people navigate the world. Today, we're talking about what it actually takes to bring people together and move things forward, especially when there are real differences in the room. There's no shortage of conversation around division or polarization, but far less focus on what it looks like in practice for communities to come together and really get something done. Our guest today has spent decades working on this exact subject. Rich Harwood is the founder and president of the Harwood Institute for Public Innovation. For over 35 years, he's worked alongside communities across the country and around the world, helping people build trust, take shared responsibility, and create tangible change where they live. He is the author of several books, including The New Civic Path, Restoring Our Belief in One Another and Our Nation, which focuses on rebuilding trust and belief in each other and our country, Stepping Forward and Unleashed, which we will talk about today. Rich, we are so excited to have you and welcome to the CivilTalk Podcast.
Vasio, thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to jump into just your background with studying and being with local communities. It didn't seem like you, when I was researching your work, it didn't seem like you just studied communities, but you chose to step directly into them. Which I think was quite remarkable. What pulled you toward this work in the first place before it became your life's path?
There were four things that actually pulled me in this direction. By the time I was 23, I'd worked on 20 political campaigns. The last one, I was an aide to a U.S. presidential candidate. I loved the candidates that I worked for. I despised the campaigns that I had to take part in. They were all about winning at any cost. And as you and your listeners know, things have only gotten worse in politics since the time that I worked in it. Second, I worked for some nonprofits who I'm still in touch with, I still admire. But I believed at the time, and I still believe today, that too many organizations have well-meaning mission statements, but are afraid really to get dirt under their fingernails. And that's what I experienced in working with nonprofits. And I think too many live off of soft money and aren't creating the impact they profess to be creating. Third, I'm a person of faith, and my faith in so many ways calls me to this work each and every day. And lastly, when I was born, I was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis, which in 1960 was a death sentence. I was given 3 to 5 years to live. My family went on a death watch. My family was overwhelmed by my illness. We didn't have money to pay for my doctors. I learned very early on what it means and what it feels like to have one's dignity stripped from you, to be manhandled by a healthcare system that was supposed to heal me but did more damage than good many times, by having false promises made to me about how quickly I would heal and what it would really take. That didn't pan out. And so all four of these things really came together and kind of conspired to lead me to the path that I'm on today. And, I have to say it's 38 years since I founded this institute when I was 27. There's not a day that goes by, really, there's not very many hours that go by where one of these experiences that prompted me to start this doesn't come back up in my mind and inform me about how I need to show up and how I need to do this work. And importantly, to your question, why I do this work.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So my next question, you founded the Harwood Institute at 27. Can you just give our listeners a brief overview of what that looks like and how you integrate into communities through the institution?
Yeah, when we started, all I had really were 8 questions that I put up on a whiteboard about how communities and society operate. And I was really interested in investigating the meaning of these questions and insights into into understanding them. And fast forward all these years now, our work is made up of what we would think of as a practical philosophy of civic faith, which I think importantly puts people and communities at the center of everything that we do, that believes that hope is an actual choice that we each face, whether we create authentic hope or false hope, that each and every individual has innate capabilities, and that we need to figure out ways to tap into those, as opposed to telling people, like I was in a hospital bed, like, you're broken, you can't do anything, we're here to fix you. That community life is covenantal. We're in relationship with one another, and need to work together. So it's a practice that I hope we'll get to, because I know it intersects with your work about being both a mindset and set of practices or behaviors about how we need to do this work. And so over the years, we've come to engage with communities in ways where we're helping build the capabilities and capacities so that people can shape their own future. Not that we can come into communities and tell people what to do like a lot of consultants do. We're not consultants. Not like a lot of experts do, where they say, I've got the answer to your problems without even understanding the context. We help people develop the mindset and the capabilities to really deeply understand their community and what matters to people, and to strengthen the civic culture of their communities, so communities can work for not just some of us, but for all of us.
Yeah, I like that idea of you are what you think. And when you have outside perspectives telling you you're broken, you're broken, you're broken, especially because it's to their benefit, it can be pretty damning.
Yeah.
So it's really important, I think, too, for one to remember you are what you believe. So when you are integrating yourself into these communities across the country, what are some phrases or keywords or things that you start to hear over and over and over again, sort of a thread that you hear throughout communities that others are missing? Because you have, I think, the unique stance, I guess, where you're in different communities. So what's one thing that you kind of hear over and over again?
That people are hungry to shape their own future, that they, amid their hunger to do that, they can't quite see a path forward. But when one helps them see possible ways forward, they're ready and willing and open to take it and to figure out what it requires of them and others to step forward and do that work. And along with that, I think, and I suspect we'll get to this, but in today's world, we keep hearing about how polarized we are. And my biggest fear is that that's now becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because the other things that I not only hear, but experience in working with people is that, yeah, we do have real differences, but amid our differences, people can find common ground. They can find things that we can agree on, so long as the conversation is not about partisan politics, but is about what matters to you in your daily life. And so I think one of the more powerful things is, A, that people are looking for a path forward, and B, that there's much more that we can agree on so that we can get moving and build together than we are currently led to believe, from the news media, from our leaders, and honestly and unfortunately from a lot of nonprofit groups that do this work.
You mentioned a lot in your philosophies. I've read this a few times, is turning outward. What does that look like? Because what you're talking about, it reminds me to look inward. What are my values?
Yeah.
What are things that make me feel like whole and that I can bring to my community? And it's interesting, you mentioned turn outward a lot. And I'm thinking of these two words together. So one has to turn inwards in order to turn outwards and make sort of external palpable change. What does turning outward in your core philosophy mean as a moment and not so much a framework?
Well, first, what I would say is led a session at a university recently where I asked this question about the difference between being turned inward and being turned outward. And many people gravitated to what you just mentioned, which is you need to be inward looking in order to turn outward. And what I said is, I want to make a distinction between introspection and personal examination and what it means in my mind, to be turned inward. So to be turned inward, when I ask people, what does it mean to be turned inward? They often say to be totally self-referential, to be me-oriented, to worry about my own survival, to be concerned only about my own programs and initiatives, to be siloed from other people or fragmented in the work that I do, to put my own organization first above all else, to put myself and my own ego above all else. Now, if in fact you believe we need to come together to solve problems, if you believe that people are looking for this path that I'm talking about, if you believe that we can find ways to figure out what we can agree on amid our real differences, all of those things can't be done in the description of turning outward that I just mentioned. Again, I'm distinguishing that from being introspective and examining oneself. Turning outward is a mindset, a posture, an orientation. It's not something you can download from the internet, as much as I would like people to download my books or articles or other things. It's not something you buy at a store that you can pay for. It's basically making a choice about which direction are you going to face, inward toward your own interests and yourself, or outward. You remember I mentioned our work is about putting communities and people first. Turning outward says that we have to have community and people always in our line of sight. That turning outward is about the fact that the shared aspirations that people have in communities can't be met by any one of us alone, any one leader, organization, or individual. We need each other. Turning outward requires that while, yes, you understand your own interests, that you also understand our common interests, and that you can transcend your individual interests to work for the common interest while holding your individual interests. It says that while we all have our own personal identities, which would be part of introspection and examining the self and knowing the self, we also can transcend those identities to have a shared identity called community, right? So turning outward is really pivotal, because what I find, and I'm curious whether or not you find this in your own work as well, is that we can teach people techniques. We can give people new tools. We can even shift our behaviors, quote unquote. But if we don't have the right mindset or orientation or posture, we can take those techniques or those behaviors or those tools and implement them in a way that's actually turned inward. And that's what we kept finding over and over again in our work. And it led us to this notion that people need to be turned outward in order to create the change that we need, and that this is fundamentally a mindset about what direction we choose, each of us chooses to be facing, and how that informs our behaviors and our actions and our discernments.
Interesting. These images that are popping up in my head are like two-way mirrors. It's a mirror, it's looping back to each other, especially with time. Yeah. It's like people are not stagnant, especially people who want to work in communities, because communities are never stagnant. They're ever changing, and so if you're working in communities, you're constantly reevaluating the self and what you offer and growing, which I think can be a really beautiful process, and it's ongoing. And I think it's really important to also build, what's the term? You're just building on the shoulder of other leaders, basically, and working from past leaders. So I think this work is really important, because you can really take cues from the work that you've done, right? And people like yourself, and build upon that, and branching off from the ego, because the ego is like super self. But I think if you're working off the shoulders and the context of other people, you can sort of go beyond that, which I think is really a beautiful way to do it.
Yeah, there's so much packed into what you just said that I won't try to go through, but I totally agree with what you just said. And you know, on the one hand, one of the things that we work with people on in our work is that communities are organic systems that we can't control. We can help to shape, but we can't control them. And to your point, they're forever changing. The dynamic is forever changing, which is one of the reasons why it's so important to be turned outward. Because when you think, just when you think you understand something in a community, there can be an external dynamic at work, an external shock to it. There can be changes in leadership. There can be changes in crime. There can be changes in whatever the context is in that community. And really good leaders and really good, I think, public actors or civic actors, what we would call civic public innovators, are constantly awake. I think so much, this is where I think it gets to the self, that in order to do this work, in order to be turned outward, it's not simply that you're looking. You can look but not see, right? You can touch something but not actually feel it. And so it requires from the self that we're awake, that we're present, that we're tuning into, in a sense, always tuning into what's happening around us, that we're constantly making discernments so that we can make meaning of what's happening and therefore make judgments about what we think is going on and ultimately make choices. So in this notion of turning outward, the thing I love about it so much, and I really do love it, is that it's not simply about following a recipe at all. It's actually about taking greater ownership of the discernments and judgments and choices we each need to make as we do this work together. And I think that's what actually engenders over time a sense of belief, a sense of agency, a sense of possibility, a sense of hope. And I think we're in short supply of those things in our society today.
Yeah, I think being a part of that community is really a beautiful beast in itself. I think that it really does engender hope when you can sort of symbolically lock hands with your neighbors and actually get something done together.
Right.
It kind of also engenders a feeling of gratitude, especially in the US. I feel I'm in LA, and so your sense of community can be really fractured because of certain external, reasons. But I do want to talk about your books. But first one is the new Civic path. And you talk about rebuilding belief. And I just want to know, so there seems to be a period, especially right now, with a lot of political and social divisiveness going on. What do you think people need to experience, not just hear, in order to galvanize inner belief and to keep that momentum going?
Yeah, I love how you frame that, because I think they do need to experience something. And it's not simply talking, though that's important. So first, I think it's important to say, I do think we're facing a crisis of belief in the country and in our lives. We no longer believe our leaders. We don't believe many institutions. We don't, we don't believe many of the religious institutions that make up our society and lives. We don't believe the news media. We don't necessarily believe in one another many times, or at least we think we don't believe in one another. And we doubt ourselves, I think, increasingly, particularly with all the anxiety that's happening today. And so they think the question is, what engenders belief? And I think what we found is that what's really important at a time when everyone says, well, we just need to fix politics, that if we simply fix politics, everything in our society will be better. And I reject that. I think politics can't create a sense of belonging for us over the long term. Politics can't create relationships over the long term. Politics can't help you feel accepted and validated over the long term. Politics can't restore our sense of individual and shared agency. Politics is meant to divide us, because you're supposed to win. That's why I got out of politics. And so then the question is, so what can engender hope in a real way, in a human and cultural way, which is what I think we need to focus on. And so I think this new civic path is about a few things. One is we need to turn outward toward one another. We can't engender the types of things I was just talking about and a sense of belief if we're turned inward. We need to figure out what we can agree on amid our real differences, because when we can agree on some things amid our real differences, now we have a basis, as you just said a moment ago, to get some stuff done. I think we need to get in motion and start building together, because while talk is important, and it is important, and it's a key part of our work, it's necessary but not sufficient. Only by building together, by creating things together, by doing things together, do we really start to rediscover our shared and our individual and shared sense of agency. Do we really begin to rediscover our shared humanity? Do I and you, each of us, start to rediscover in ourselves and in one another that we have innate capabilities that may have nothing to do with money, typically don't have anything to do with money, or what kind of car you drive, or how much money you have in your bank account, or how you're dressed. It doesn't have anything to do with those things. And when we can begin to create things and lift them up, make them more visible to one another, then we can begin to both see what we're creating. We can send signals to other people that it's possible to create things. And we can begin to shift our narrative into a more of a can-do narrative, which I think is really critical right now. So that's what the new civic path, it's a lot more than that, but in a nutshell, that's what it's about. And here's the good thing. It's not a theory. I haven't always called it the new civic path, but in one shape or another, this has actually been the work of the Institute all these years. And I've seen so many people and so many communities, not only in the US, but in other countries, get on this now new civic path and restore their sense of possibility and hope that we can actually believe in one another and believe in ourselves and get things moving in a better direction.
Yeah, I think that when you're speaking about this, I'm thinking about what have I done recently or in the past that have promoted this. And it's interesting. I think that people need to feel a little uncomfortable moving into this new civic path, because it involves you being more involved in something that you probably weren't involved in before. And I think that can be kind of uncomfortable, especially if you're doing it alone, or you don't have anyone to join you, or you're used to your skepticism. It's so much easier to be skeptical than it is to participate. So I think that, we have conversations like this with people like you to get people out of their mode of skepticism and into a mode of participation and into doing something, because it's easy to be skeptical, and sometimes you can get entangled in your high horse of skepticism. And I think it's important, if you really want to make a change, is to get off the high horse and really participate in the community and ask questions, and to, like you're saying earlier, get some dirt underneath your nails. So with that being said, what's your advice on getting the first step? Because that's a lot, but what's the first step one can do to sort of get onto that new civic path? And what do you think they need to add and let go of?
I love how you put sort of the skepticism of being on your high horse and being skeptical. We often I think skepticism can be enormously helpful, but I also think it's a way for people sometimes to avoid having to engage.
Right.
Right. It's a defense mechanism in some cases. And I think the other thing to recognize in this, which I think is really critical, which I think you were getting at, is what I find in this work. There are lots of things that are difficult about doing this work. One is that I think people either don't have or have lost confidence in their ability to do this. There is a fear, an anxiety, a trepidation about doing this kind of thing. Like, we have an exercise we do in our public innovator labs. It's just a really small thing. We pair people up and we give them 4 questions that we've designed that get at some of the things we're talking about today. And we say, okay, the person next to you is going to dial someone up on their cell phone and they're going to hand you the phone. And we want you to ask them these 4 questions. They don't know the person. And then you're going to dial someone up and hand them your phone. They don't know the person you're handing them. And, at first people have so much fear about this and they're skeptical about it. They don't think it's going to work. They don't think they have the right questions. They don't think anyone's going to talk to them. They don't think anyone's going to give them the time of day. And then 2 minutes into it, when they ask the first question, you can see everyone's body language just shift. You can hear their tone of voice become more confident. You can see them leaning into the table. You can see them taking notes. You can see them get ready and say when the first call is over, they want to do another call. It's remarkable. It takes 2 minutes. It takes 2 minutes. As you said before, it's experiential. It's not theoretical, conceptual. It's experiential. So what I would say as a first step is 1, give yourself permission just to take 1 step. That's really important. Like literally stop. Just say to yourself, I give myself permission to take 1 step. I don't need to worry about the second step. I don't need to get across the room. I don't need to do something that's going to have effects across town. I just need to take the first step. The first step is probably adopt a posture being turned outward. The second step might just be asking someone a question. What are your aspirations for your community or this neighborhood or for your life? And another step might be, see, I'm already up to 4 steps. Another step might be joining with other people to do this so that you can do it together, learn something about the community, however you're defining that, and see what matters to people and see if you can take 1 small action that's related to what they told you. Like, that's one way to get started. If more of us did that, as opposed to just sit around and complain or bemoan the conditions in society or talk about the fact that no one gives a damn about us or that you don't have the capabilities to do this, everyone has the capabilities to do this. That's the good thing about it. It gets more complicated, but you just asked me for the first step. Everyone has the capability to take the first step.
I love that. It requires you to reshape also your relationship to, well, first of all, I want to say this is, creating conditions where belief can grow. And I think that's really important. That's what you're talking about right now, is creating that quote unquote safe space for us to believe that we can actually make a change first. Because if you can't believe it in the first place, it's not going to get done. Even if you have to maybe lie to yourself a little bit in the most sort of positive way, I think that's something that you should do. But also I think it's important, how do you talk to people when you are asking them to change your relationship to external things around them, whether it be politics or even social media? I think right now it's really easy for us to kind of get sidetracked, even with people like maybe even you or me, where it's our day-to-day job to create change and to be sort of a guide and a helpful North Star for people who are sort of finding their own footing in this sort of puzzle of change. How do you ask people or show people to change their relationship to external things that might sort of subconsciously disorient them?
That's a great question. First, when we're working with people in communities, one of the first things we do is ask them to say, what do you think the characteristics of being turned inward are? What do you think the characteristics of being turned outward are? What do you make of these 2 lists? Where do you spend a lot of your time? Not all of your time, but a lot of your time. And when people discover that, and it really is a discovery on their part, I can't emphasize that enough. It's not me telling them or one of our coaches or teachers. It's us helping them create this juxtaposition and them discovering, oh, I'm really turned inward. And to do the things that I really value and that matter to people, I need to be turned outward. So that's one important thing. I didn't tell them anything. They discovered it. The second thing is that there's only so much you can teach people, let's say, about our practice. They have to do it. And so getting waylaid by social media, getting overwhelmed by the news, the daily news media, believing that nothing will ever change. The most important thing, like our lab where we teach people this approach, the first lab, there are two of them, is called Getting Started. So we have a mantra in our work, get in motion. We have another mantra, start small to go big, right? So the most important thing, we're back to what you talked about earlier, the most important thing for people to overcome their being disoriented, their frustration, their disbelief is to get in motion and see what emerges from it. And what I have found over and over and over again, that when they get in motion, they discover that they have innate capabilities, that they do have confidence or they can develop confidence, that others do care like they care, that they're not alone, that they can produce something positive. It's not going to light the world on fire, but it does make a difference in their sphere of influence. And that does really matter to people. And so that's what unleashes, in a sense, their own personal potential, their potential with other people, and importantly, the potential for a small action to catalyze a larger chain reaction of actions that take root, grow, and spread over time that touch many, many more people. And that's the premise of how we think about how change occurs when we teach our work.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about what you're talking about right now is, I'm thinking about change in my own life and the change that I've seen with others and just how micro it is and how small it starts. And I think that we're living in a time where change needs to be this huge thing. Like I moved to Europe and now look at me in front of the Eiffel Tower and posting it on whatever, and it's this huge change and you're like, wow, and it's just this burst of dopamine. And I think the real change really happens very quietly, almost silently, small dosages. And it's really interesting. I think that when you're thinking about external things and how that can work internally, I think a lot of people who are leaders also have things externally that really ground them in the participation of small change. And whether that be gardening or whether that be, playing an instrument, those are small. You have to do small things every single day in order to produce a huge outcome. And it's sort of like a meditation, you're training your brain to work on something very small every single day in order to produce a huge shift. And I think that's what you're talking, it reminds me of,
Yeah. It's interesting because you used the phrase burst of dopamine. And the thing about a burst of dopamine is it dissipates. Over time, it actually, in short periods of time, it goes away. Then you need another burst. It's like a fix.
Right.
I need a fix of dopamine. And we all know that whatever you might need a fix for, whether it's that, a drink, I exercise a lot, that it doesn't actually provide the ongoing effects that you often want. Exercise and yoga might be, or meditation would be different because you're building up over time to something. And, it's interesting, just a quick story. In Reading, Pennsylvania, where we just finished some work, it was declared the poorest community in America 10 years ago. It was once predominantly white. It's now 70% Latino. It's highly fragmented. There was no sense of shared purpose. People had lost a sense of hope. This is all things people told us about their own community. Education wasn't working for most people. And through this work, the community created a community-led, community-driven change agenda around education. One of the 9 areas that they came up with was English as a second language. And in 2 short years, they created big change, systemic, transformational change. We have this all documented. It's on our website that people can get for free. But to your point, the transformational systemic change around English as a second language started with a really small effort in a basement of a local church where people created practice dinners where people learning English who didn't have the confidence to practice English with other people, and they often didn't have anyone else to practice English with, so they couldn't learn it. A church said, okay, well, we can create dinners where people can come together and feel safe, come with other people they know, come with English-speaking folks and Spanish-speaking folks, and together they can mutually learn each other's language. That one action then rippled out to other churches creating these practice dinners, which then rippled out to civic groups creating them and employers creating them, which ultimately rippled out to the community realizing they had lots of resources for English as a second language, but most people didn't trust the places providing them. They weren't culturally sensitive. They weren't in places people could get to. They were too fragmented. And so the community ultimately created an integrated system of services that if you came to my English as a second language program and I wasn't the right one, instead of trying to hold on to you in an inward way so I could bump up my numbers, I'm now referring you to a better program for you.
Right.
And there were so many actions that were taken, which are really important because I think we do need big change, as you said. But how did it start? It started with one little practice dinner that was rooted in what really mattered to people, that they weren't finding in the community, that would enable them themselves to take a step forward and begin to create the lives they want, and importantly, have a greater sense of dignity, that their life matters and that other people care about it.
Yeah, that's really important. I think that there has to be a basis of care for that to change because, again, there's, that innate care and that drive to just boost numbers. Mm. And I think it's really important to have a community where there are leaders who really are moved by care and put those people in leadership positions. How do you, for people who want to become a leader or are too afraid to step into that position, because I feel like I meet people on a day-to-day, not day-to-day, but I put myself personally in positions where I come into contact with people who I'm like, you would make a really great leader. But they don't know where to start. Or I see the certain characteristics or qualities where I'm like, you're intelligent, you're compassionate, you're inclusive, you have a lot to say, you're just shy, and you need to be put in that position. And I think there's a really interesting relationship between that person and like a mentor, and putting them in that place. And I think that there's a lot to be said about unlocking capacity and capability in order for real change to actually take momentum. If you could talk to these people, and I'm sure you do a lot, but anyone listening, what is something that people like that can do in order to, put them in a position where a ripple effect of change can actually take footing?
Whoop. Oh, I thought you froze for a second there. Thanks. I would say that, on the one hand, I'd love to say, look, you should come to one of our public innovator labs so that you can engage with the mindset and practices that we engage people around. Because I think, again, I think so much of leadership these days is about people saying to you, well, if you just learn some techniques, you can lead. And I think leadership is much more than that. I think it is a mindset of being turned outward. You can use your own definition of being turned outward, but to me, having people in whatever community you're engaged with, whether it's a workplace or a neighborhood or a family or a community or a country. I think it is a set of practices around how do you ask questions that enable people to tell you about themselves, to tell you about what matters to them. What does it really mean to listen in ways so that you're listening both for what they're saying and for what they're not saying or what they're trying to say, so that you can help them articulate something that may be inchoate for them, or maybe they have never no one's ever asked them about before, to help them be safe, feel safe, so that they can articulate it. I think leadership is about what does it mean to bring people together, where you mentioned this earlier about where your ego is not at the center of things. I always say to people who I'm working with to become leaders, you're not at the center of anything here. I'm not at the center of anything here. People and communities are at the center. We're trying to create the enabling environment whereby people can come together and take action. That's not about us. You can inspire people, you can engage people, you can help them feel safe, you can teach them things, but we're not at the center of this. Like, let's get clear about that. I think it's about how we help people think about how to take action on what they're learning, because I really do believe action is essential to this equation. And I think one other thing I would mention is, and I know this is important in your work, is we call it civic learning, which is how are we continually learning from the people around us and incorporating that learning back into what we understand is important and valuable to people, so that we can shape and oftentimes recalibrate what we're doing, because either we put our stake in the wrong place and we need to pick it up and move it, or, as you mentioned earlier, that the conditions around us have changed. And we have to have both the courage and also the humility to recognize those changes and change along with them, if we want to be relevant and significant and impactful in the leadership that we're exercising.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, the ego and talking to people who have a difficulty sort of letting go of the ego. How do you participate in a conversation with someone who is ego driven and getting them to a place where that's not at the forefront? Because I think that's a very delicate conversation. And sometimes with people who have sort of a stronghold on that ego, they've never maybe really had someone confront them on such a tricky subject like that, or maybe are not even aware that they're putting themselves first before the community. How do you sort of break through in those conversations and actually promote real change on something that's it can be conflicting?
I think there are different approaches for different situations, but I'd never say to them, boy, you SOB, you've got a really strong ego that's getting in the way here. I mean, I have had to, sitting across the table from me in this office that I'm in, I've asked partners of ours to visit with me where we can talk about this very question, and we have to deal with this in communities all the time. I would probably ask people, what are your aspirations for the community? How have you been able to achieve those? Notice I didn't start with where did you fall short. Then I might ask them, what else would you like to achieve that you haven't been able to achieve? Who else do you need for that, to achieve that? And inevitably what emerges is that people haven't achieved what they want to achieve. They want more. They believe they should do more, that we need to create more. They begin to recognize that they're alone and they need others to do this. And then, the question would be, well, who would you trust that you could work with? Because again, you asked me before about the first step. So I'm not asking them to take on the world and trust everyone. I'm just saying, who could you trust that you could get started with? And I think each of those things, in a way, remember I said about turning inward and turning outward, it creates a juxtaposition. So if you ran back the questions I just asked like 4 or 5 questions. they're creating juxtapositions between and among each question, and from one set of answers to the next, they're juxtaposed. And in that juxtaposition, people can discover something about what it is they really want to do that they're not able to do yet. And they can begin to discover that, oh, I'm going to have to change a little in order to do this. And that's the opening. I didn't have to bop them over the head. I didn't have to make them feel guilty. I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to push them into a corner. I always try never to shame someone. I don't see anything positive coming out of shaming people. They just, it's destructive. And so my thing is like, how can we help people discover something that they probably already know, but they've never been asked or never really had a chance to think about? And how can we do it in a way that unleashes their potential to move forward? Now, there's one other point to this. As they move forward, you mentioned mentors about 20 minutes ago. As they move forward, it's really helpful to have a mentor or a buddy or an ally or a friend who can say, Rich, you said you wanted to do X. Is that really X? You talked about the mirror before. Let me hold up the mirror so you can see what it is that you're doing and saying. Is that really what you said you wanted to say and do? Is that really going to get you where you need to go? What would be an alternative? Notice I didn't stop there. What would be an alternative to that would enable you to accelerate and deepen your efforts? And that's where I see people grow.
Yeah. I like this idea. I think it's really easy when you're wanting change and you're looking to people around you and you're pointing the finger or you're exposing bad behavior. It's really easy to fall into that trap. But what you're talking about right now is a sort of unfolding, allowing that person's sort of gifts, I guess, or positive traits to come sort of unfold. And I think that's a really delicate thing that people can do when they're trying to make change, is to lead with curiosity. And we talk about this a lot on the podcast, is to just lead with curiosity, lead with a question, and stop exposing. And I think that, again, it's hard to not do that. It's hard to see something happening and see how it's harming people around them, sometimes innocuously, and to not just expose and to point the finger. But I think what you're talking about right now is just a way more delicate way to promote change that really has potential for long-term capacity.
Yeah. What's interesting is that, so yes, and I think this is where the inner work comes in, right? Because one needs to be conscious of their own fears and their own concerns. But that's, I don't think that's where people need to start. They need to start with these steps. The other thing that I think is really important is that I say to people is, like, in the work that like, I got called into Newtown after the massacre there, where 20 first graders and 6 adults got gunned down by a 19-year-old gunman or a 20-year-old gunman. That was a really tough situation. People were traumatized. They were fearful. There was a lot of anger. There was rage. And, there's lots of parts of this work that are really difficult. When I've gone and worked with some communities, I've been followed around by people on the far right or the far left who wanted their point of view, almost like the campaigns I worked on, their point of view to win at any cost. And I had to push them back. But look, those are the examples that I would say to people, don't put yourself in those situations. Like, there are hard parts about this work, but where you want to start is where you are. Like, take yourself where you are. Take the situation where you are as it is and just start there. Like, give yourself permission to start there. And to your point earlier, I think we have wound people up so much that all change needs to be comprehensive from the get-go, that all change needs to cost a lot of money or it's not worthwhile, that all change needs to be complex and sophisticated, otherwise it doesn't have real merit, that all change needs to bring in thousands of people else you haven't created a movement. And honestly, it's a bunch of garbage, because it sets up this false premise or false premises that stop us in our track, that devalues us, that tells us that if you're not creating big change, it's not worthwhile. There's a saying in my faith that says, if you save one life, you save the world. And I often say to people in speeches, why do you think they teach us this? All religions have something like this. And I think it's because what they're trying to teach us is if you save one life, if you reach out, you value human life, you value people, that you value people's dignity, that you've heard someone else, that you've put a stake in the ground that it's not just about you, it's about someone else also, that you care about something larger than yourself. And that's, I think, what we need to focus on more of. It's not how big or small the changes that you create, it's that you step forward.
Yeah.
It's that you step forward.
Yeah. It's interesting. As you're talking, I'm thinking about, when change catches on in a big way. And
Yeah.
it's like that change had always been there in a small way, or that idea had always been there in a small way. And it's interesting. It's kind of scary how it catches fire and,
Yeah.
becomes like, who decides that this is important? And because it's always been important, it's like when art becomes famous posthumously. It's like Van Gogh's paintings were always beautiful and always there. And it wasn't until someone was like, this is good. And then it takes on this sort of like mentality of its own. But it's crazy how, you know, for example, Al Green, he started off in a small Baptist church before it went crazy. It was always there and it was always good. And I think that, like, when I think about that, I really think about the importance of individual critical thinking. And it's important for you to decide, the individual, what is valuable and what is important, because if it's true and valuable for you, and it comes from a really good place, it's probably going to be helpful for the community as a whole. And you don't have to wait for something to catch fire on a grander scale for you to be a part of it. And I think that can be very, yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. No, I love what you're saying, because when I think about like the Reading story, it's like, so what allowed that one practice dinner to grow into scores of practice dinners, to grow into change from the community college and the school district and all sorts of other things. And I think, to your point, like, did that desire not exist before the Institute started working with Reading? No, it existed. It was latent. It was latent. And so what enabled it to take off? We say, what enables it to take root, grow, and spread like a positive contagion? Like, that's the line we use and the idea we have. And what enabled it was that people felt that what mattered to them mattered to others, and it was the focus of what people were working on. They saw people in small groups coming together and making a difference. They saw that one small action like that practice dinner was growing. They saw other people stepping forward. And as you said before, this all unfolded over time. Time is our ally here, not our enemy. And as it unfolded, a new trajectory was created. Instead of it starting with a burst of dopamine and then running out, it created with a small set of steps, and it grew over time and expanded in an upward trajectory, what we would call a new trajectory of hope. And in doing so, it was sending signals to other people who weren't involved yet that, hey, something good is happening here. Whereas one of my funders said, when I asked her, why do you think this worked? She said, because people like to win, and they saw that we were winning together when before we were all separated apart from one another. And the beauty of this is, and the durability of it, is that it takes time. It's not a burst. It's not a burst. It's lighting a light fire that begins to grow more and more and more over time, and that burns bright over time. And that's something, back to the beginning of our conversation, that's something that people can believe in. And I think that's what enables the fire to grow, belief.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you personally ever lost sort of faith in that process? Because, a lot of what we're talking about, you have peaks and you have valleys. And, I think it's really hard to get back on the horse when you're in that sort of valley stage.
Yeah.
So with that, like, have you personally lost faith in that process, and kind of what brought you back to that point where you're like, I can do this. I'm going to get back on it. I'm going to keep that continuum going.
Two things. So yes, there isn't anything I've worked on that didn't stall at some point, wasn't in danger of fizzling out, where the people we were working with lost faith. So these things are ever present. And what gives me hope, what I think about when those moments occur at this point, is what have I seen people capable of doing, where people have went in their own, like in Alamance County, North Carolina, where we just released a report and the initiative felt like it was going to die at one point. People stepped back. They thought about, what are we learning here? What can we learn from what we're learning here? Well, how do we need to recalibrate what we're trying to do here? Who else do we need so that we can move forward? How can we take an action in our sphere of influence that will help us restart our momentum? How can we take the next action after that? They didn't try to solve the whole puzzle. They just tried to learn about where they were, what they had learned from what they'd done so far, where they were, and what could be some modest steps that they could take that would give them a greater sense of possibility and hope that they could move forward. And I've seen it happen over and over and over again. The question is, will we have the courage to stop long enough, to pause long enough, to take account of where we are, and to learn from where we are, and to have the courage to not fear what we might learn, and to have the humility to understand that we don't have all the answers, but we can find some answers if we team up with some other folks and figure out how we can move forward together and just take the next step. And I think that's a big part of what we work with people on, and try to help them develop their own confidence that they can, it's not unlike someone going through therapy who develops the confidence that they can begin to solve some of their own problems, figure out what's really going on. And I think in a similar way, in a civic way, we need to develop more of those capabilities, but people have the innate capability to do it. That's the good news.
Yeah, I think people have a lot of innate resilience, and it's about tapping into that. I don't think people are born and, I want to be sad. I agree with you in the sense that humanity has this shared desire to be happy and to thrive. And the only way to
Yeah.
get there is through resilience. And the only way to get there past and into that deep definition of resilience is to be okay with your mistakes, and to be okay with the fact that you're probably going to make some grand mistakes in the future. And it's just sort of about pivoting,
Yeah.
and it's okay to bask in the sort of sadness and of that mistake. But resilience always allows that innate resilience allows you to put your shoes back on and get back on out there, and I think that's really important. And to, obviously
Yeah.
surround yourself with people who allow you to do that and remind you that they did that in order to get there as well.
Yeah.
So we're reaching the end of this session, but a few last questions I want to dive into. For what's sort of one small shift? I mean, we talked about this earlier, but if someone feels sort of disconnected from the self or from their community, what's one thing they can do working with you and the Harwood Institute? You mentioned a class earlier, but
Mhm.
if you could sort of give an overview of directly like what they can do working with you, is there like a specific class they can
Yeah.
take on your website or through
Yeah.
the Institute that can sort of jumpstart them into feeling connected to themselves and their community?
Yeah. Thanks for that question. Yeah. I mean, I think so. The easiest thing is we have these, what we call public innovator labs. We do them sometimes in communities, like we just did one a couple of weeks ago in Richmond, Virginia, to get something started here. And we have virtual labs. So you can do them from wherever you are, and you can sign up by yourself. You'll meet lots of other people. So immediately, they're 5 sessions, they're 5 2-hour sessions. They're interactive, they're not taped. So they're live. And the beauty of this is, the Getting Started Lab, for instance, will teach you this mindset of turning outward and some of these practices that you and I have been talking about. So that's really important because you can apply those. Each class is set up in a way that you can take what you've learned in that class and apply it the minute the class is over. Right? It's very applied. The second thing is that you're going to be going through it with a cohort of people who are all there because they want to be part of something larger than themselves. So immediately, if you feel alone, if you feel disconnected, if you feel like you don't have, right, for whatever reason, a sense of agency right now, if you're depressed about what the hell's going on in the world, like a lot of folks are, you will have an immediate community that you're plugging into. And so many people who go through this stay in touch with each other and support. Remember, I was talking about the buddy or the ally. So many people find someone in these classes and they become their buddies or allies moving forward. So that's a really quick step, I would say, a lot of people can take.
I love that. It's just like social media done the right way, just honing in on what matters.
Yeah, it's a cool class and I love it. And we've transformed it numerous times based on feedback and, as you were saying earlier, the changing context of what's going on around us. And we had to adjust too. That's
amazing. Well, I'll see you in class. That sounds fun.
Great. Yeah.
And so on to our last question. I like to ask this question to everyone who comes on the podcast. What's one thing that you do, sort of like a daily practice, that allows you to stay grounded in the sometimes difficult work that you do on a day-to-day basis?
So I mentioned I'm a person of faith. My touchstone, my life touchstone, is the burning bush in the Bible, where God calls out to Moses, and Moses is stuttering, and he's like, "Who am I for you to call me?" He doesn't have faith in his abilities, and God says, "You need to go release the Israelites from their burden of oppression." And the thing that I think about in that story, and I think about this more than once daily, this is the thing that keeps me grounded, is we're all flawed. I'm flawed. I'm broken. I was broken from the minute I was born, with this illness that I had. And I learned very early on what it's like to be broken. I think this picture that I have in my mind reminds me that we're all broken, but that we all, in my case, we all can stand before God and he will accept us as we are and expects certain things of us, expects certain things of me that I can't hide. I need to show my face. I need to be visible. I need to account for what I'm doing every day. And that for all my shortcomings, and I have a lot of shortcomings, I do have innate capabilities that are gifts that I can put into play. Like everyone has innate capabilities that are gifts that they can put into play. The question is not, what am I missing? The question is, what do I have that I need to use? And this picture I have in my mind tells me it's not okay to turn away. It's not okay to hide. I don't have to take on the world, but I am responsible for what I do and say, and I need to get on with it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's incredibly deep, and I know that I'll be thinking about that, and I really appreciate you sharing your habit and your positive insight on keeping you grounded. I really appreciate that.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for being here today. If people want to get a hold of you, I know we mentioned the classes that you can take. If people want to get a hold of you, where can they reach you?
Two things. We have a website, theharwoodinstitute.org, all one word. And there's lots of resources on there that people can download. Some of the reports I mentioned are on there. We have tools on there. These classes, we have something called the Harwood School. People will be able to see the different types of classes that we offer. If people want to drop me a line, which I love getting emails, there's a email on our site that they can use. And if they address the email to me, it does get to me. So it's a generic email, but it does get to me. So please drop an email and I'll get back to you, or someone will get back to you. But if it's addressed to me, I'll get back to you, and would love to hear from folks.
Amazing. Thank you again so much for being on the Civil Talk podcast. I really appreciate this really meaningful and deep discussion and all your insights. I appreciate you being here today.
Thanks so much for the invitation. It's been great to spend an hour with you. So thank you.
Yeah, indeed. So again, that's the harwoodinstitute.org. We will have that on our website, including this podcast and ways to get a hold of Rich today. And if you enjoyed our conversation, make sure to like and subscribe. We have more information at civiltalk.com about our AI tool, Clarion, which helps you track communication patterns, emotional intelligence, and the quality of your conversation within your team. So check that out at civiltalk.com. Rich, thank you again for your important work. And to our listeners, thank you for being here. And we'll see you next time on the Civil Talk podcast. Amazing.